This week on London Real, we have Dr. Carl Hart, professor at Columbia University and expert in neuroscience and drugs.
No, it's not my job to say what the society is ready for. My job as a scientist and an educator is to give the best available information.
Cocaine?
No thanks.
And so the notion that we should live in a drug-free world or have a drug-free world, that's not even really worth discussing. And me as an educator, I want people to actually think and have their kids understand and evaluate the evidence and the information. I mean, Barack Obama not only has admitted smoking marijuana, but also using cocaine. So if we're talking about addiction, yeah, we can say the problem is not drugs. I mean, the simple evidence there is that the vast majority of people who use the substance don't have a problem.
London Real presents Dr. Carl Hart, Debunking Drug Myths.
I love being idealistic. I mean, when I stop being idealistic, well, fuck, I mean, I don't want to be here.
London Real presents a gathering of the greatest minds in the history of our show, announcing a 3-day transformational experience live in London. Become part of the conversation. Challenge yourself. Upgrade your peer group. Change your game. What if you could be part of an elite network of individuals looking to significantly improve their business and personal lives? A place where you will meet future investors, collaborators, mentors, and allies. Learn from the best in the world how to scale your business, build your network, publish your book, and take your game to the next level. London Real Masterminds. Featuring an all-star lineup, including Elliot Hulse, Peter Joseph, Jeff Thompson, Mike Dolce, Chris Eubank, Tucker Max, Alex Icon, and many more. All battling it out in a 20-minute TED Talk style format for a $20,000 prize. Watch the speakers compete, network with an extraordinary group of professionals, and interact in roundtable discussions with our most famous London Real guests ever. It all happens at London Real Masterminds over 3 days at the 5-star Langham Hotel in London. But this isn't just an experience. It's a 1-year membership into an elite network of London Reelers that will become your future business partners, mentors, investors, and biggest supporters. Challenge yourself. Upgrade your peer group. Change your game. Become real. London Real, sponsored by Bulletproof. My guest today is a fascinating individual indeed, and it's just one of the pleasures I have to host this show, that I get to interact with such a range of guests. This is Dr. Carl Hart, who is a professor at Columbia University in America. He is also the author of a book called High Price, and it's really a narrative from his own personal perspective, but it's really how we as humans and as Americans and global citizens, we don't really understand drugs. We a lot of times vilify the drug and the drug user, and a lot of times we overreact and overestimate what drugs actually do to people. And it's really the ultimate form of a media bias, and Carl makes the statements that are very difficult for other people to make. And he's He's got a TED Talk that's fascinating in it, and it's titled, "Let's Stop Abusing Drug Users." And it's really fascinating the kind of counterintuitive ways he looks at what we just assume and what we've been told since childhood by Nancy and Ronald Reagan: just say no to drugs, this is your brain on drugs. And he really gets down to the reality. And the reality is, most people, when they use drugs, don't become addicted. And we a lot of times have this wrong perception of what's really happening out there. And I was just so refreshed to have Carl talk to me. Also, he's just one cool dude. And you know, you just want to listen to him, and he works so hard. And you know, later on we get into some of his work ethic, and he's out there as on a mission. The man is on a mission. And I first saw him on the Joe Rogan Experience a year ago and was amazingly captivated with him, as I'm sure you were too if you saw that episode. So sit back and relax, and prepare to have your views challenged as you experience Dr. Hart in all his forms. If you haven't checked out everything that we have going on over at the London Real Academy, well, I don't know where you've been. It's hopefully where you're watching this full episode, where you can watch with no pop-ups or no drama. You just log in with your social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn login, and boom, you have access to all of our full episodes. And if you want to become a member of the tribe and really build the best you, then all you have to do is upgrade to full membership and become one of the founding 500 members. And once you do that, and by the way, there's a free 30-day money-back guarantee. If you don't like anything, we'll give you your money back. But for really a small amount of money, you can become part of a new tribe, a bunch of people that are out there to be better and to keep each other accountable and respect each other and love each other, but also push each other. And I've just been amazed. You probably caught one of my Wednesday webinars, which I do every week now, and just felt the incredible energy that's happening. I didn't know that we were going to create this thing, and now we're just running with it, and it's amazing. It's honestly the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I thought London Real was the best thing that ever happened to me a few years ago, and you know, I'm getting a bit emotional. This is even better. And so I'm so excited to actually connect with a lot of you out there, when before we just couldn't. It was just YouTube comments and tweets and things like that. This is real. We have meetups in the studios. We have premium content. We have coursework. We have live episodes. So much happening there. But the real core is the social network and the activity feed to find out what other London Realers are doing. And we're setting goals and we're making things happen. So I hope you see you over there. If you become a member, send me a private message and we'll work on your goals for the year, or I can help out in any way, and can't wait to see you there. And now I'm going to leave you with an amazing gentleman, Dr. Carl Hart. London Real Academy. Build the best you.
When I go in and look at a person or a business, I want to hear him talk about his dreams.
Am I living in alignment to the way I want to be living? And there's a feeling you get if you're not.
A community of action-oriented people that will keep you accountable to your goals. Sign up now for a free 30-day trial. London Real Set Design by Timothy Olton. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Carl Hart, who is an associate professor at Columbia University in the departments of psychiatry and psychology. You are also a research scientist at the New York State Psychiatric Institute and have published nearly 100 scientific articles in the area of neuropsychopharmacology. You've written the book High Price, A Neuroscientist's Journey of Self-Discovery that challenges everything you know about drugs and society. The filmmaker Eugene Jarecki says you, quote, combine the rigor of a scientist with the street smarts of a former hustler. The result is High Price, a fiercely uncompromising look at public health and an inspiring personal journey. Dr. Hart, welcome to London Real.
Glad to be here, man. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, it's a real pleasure. I think I first made contact with you like about a year ago after I saw you on Joe Rogan, and I'm just glad it finally happened.
Yeah, we both are Joe, big fans of Joe. So
yeah, we both sat in that seat, and spent some time with him. There's so much to talk about, and I'm just going to dive in. There's a point in your book where you said that, quote, most of what we think we know about drugs, addiction, and choice is wrong, and my work and my life shows why. For people that have never met you, how do you usually start off the discussion of your research, your book, your life. You know, how do you do that? Where do you jump in?
People who've never met me, I usually tell them that I'm a shoe salesman, you know, because I don't really want to talk about drugs with people who have no sort of background or no real interest in this. So it's a hard thing because people have these ideas, like I said, that what they think they know is actually wrong. So like you and I are talking now, if we think about like, what are those things that they think are wrong? For example, they think drugs like crack cocaine or heroin, they think most of the people who use these drugs, the illegal drugs, are addicted, whereas most are not. 80 to 90% of the people who use these drugs will never become addicted. They just go on and live their life in normal manners. And so that's one of the things that I tried to make clear in the book, try to really get that across to folks. Other things I tried to get across to folks is that, you know, we know how to deal with drug-related problems. I mean, particularly as it relates to drug addiction, we know a lot about dealing with drug addiction, even though the people who are addicted make up a small percentage. The problem is that we just haven't had the courage to be honest with people about drugs. So rather than saying, for example, sometimes people who use heroin, they run the risk of overdosing from that drug. Well, the risk of overdosing from heroin is relatively low if you're only using heroin alone. But if you combine it with alcohol or another sedative like a benzodiazepine, that risk dramatically increases. 75% of the people who die from heroin-related death do so because they combine it with another sedative. These kinds of things make people uncomfortable because you're telling people now, if you're going to use heroin, just don't combine it with another sedative. So that you are accepting the fact that people will use heroin. That's right. Rational. But sometimes people will say, you're condoning drug use. No, I'm understanding human behavior. Humans behave like this. Humans will do this. They've always used heroin. They've always used opiates. Why do I think that they're going to stop? My job is to keep them safe and to keep our society safe.
Right. You said that people will always use drugs and they have always used drugs. I think at one point you even said a drug-free America is impossible and maybe even not even wanted.
Well, I certainly don't want to live in a drug-free world. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, if we start to think about, let's just start to talk about the government sort of, particularly the US government sort of sanctioning of drug use. Think about wars, think about our pilots, our aviators, people who work extended periods of time. They're on drugs, they're on amphetamine, same drugs as like methamphetamine. They're on these drugs. And you know what? We want them on these drugs. We want them on these drugs so they don't fall asleep when they're working these extended periods. When people go to various shows, music, rock concerts or concerts, many of the performers are probably taking stimulants because they have to perform in another city, because they have to perform the next night. Anybody go to American baseball games? I don't know why you would, but you might if you go to baseball games. The drug in baseball is amphetamine. I mean, they play 162 games a year, sometimes doubleheaders, 2 games a day. Of course they're taking amphetamines. It makes sense. We think about pain. If I'm in pain, I want an opiate, a heroin-like drug. I don't want acetaminophen. I don't want ibuprofen, particularly if it's a difficult or really tough pain or a pain that's really severe. And so the notion that we should live in a drug-free world or have a drug-free world, that's not even really worth discussing. That's not even really, that's just so low level. I mean, it's hard for me to get excited about a conversation like that because it's not reality.
Right. Why are we tended as humans to go for this like binary discussion? Like you said, it's either if you're talking about drugs and you're not saying they are the devil, then by definition you're advocating them. Why do we get so ultra sensitive about something, whereas we don't get that sensitive about, say, other risky behavior like driving cars fast or this or that? What is it in us that makes us so scared about drugs?
Well, it's certain drugs now.
Right.
And so we want to be clear because we certainly don't get queasy about conversations related to alcohol. which could, in some cases, be one of the more dangerous drugs that we have available. Or even marijuana now, we don't get queasy about that, but we certainly get uncomfortable about heroin or crack cocaine. And we do in part because drug use, the users of those drugs, we tend to look at as being other, people other than us, and people who are undesired, or undesirable people. And those undesirable people are the real reason that we are responding the way that we respond. And the folks who we think are the primary drug users oftentimes are not even the primary drug users, because opiate use, crack cocaine use, all of those drugs are used by people who look just like the majority of the folks in a society.
Okay, so it's a media bias that happened there? Did it happen kind of when the drugs were originally introduced and we saw them in a film, or we saw it here? I mean, you're talking about heroin, like withdrawals. I think I remember seeing a Hawaii Five-0 episode when I was a kid, and there was some dude in a jail cell having heroin withdrawals. And as soon as that was, but that's the only time I've ever seen anything like that, and yet that is stuck in my head. You're laughing.
No, I'm laughing at a Hawaii Five-0.
Yeah, I know. I'm dating myself.
Right?
Yeah, great show.
Book 'em,
This
Dano.
is the original Hawaii Five-0, by the way. There's a new one in it.
Yeah, no, I know the original. I hear you. So I think it's more than the media bias.
Okay.
I think that even in science and medicine and those sort of endeavors, those professional activities, we have worked to perpetuate that bias as well, that misinterpretation. Because in part, the folks who come to treatment, those people who have a real serious heroin problem, for example, they need your help, and they are probably really down on their luck, and they are not doing well. They don't see the vast majority of the heroin user. And so they generalize from that narrow sort of slice that narrow picture that they have. So they also play a role, and they play a role in educating our population, and the media just kind of reinforces that view. And when you have all of these forces working together, that's why you remember Hawaii Five-0.
Right.
You know, because if you were going to your physician, and your physician or people you respected in medicine were saying, no, Brian, that's not true. I mean, for example, I prescribed you Percocet for your toothache or for some shoulder pain that you have. It's the same, or essentially the same drug as heroin. And so what you saw in Hawaii Five-0 is just, that's more exaggerated. Now, and that's the reality, but your physician was not saying that sort of thing.
Right. There's a line in the movie Trainspotting. I'm sure you've seen the movie Trainspotting.
Yeah, I saw it.
Where I think the main character's coming off heroin, and he goes into his mom's pharmacy cabinet and grabs some of her pills. And he says, I'm going to take these from my mom, who in her own societal accepted way is also a drug addict. And I just hadn't ever seen it put that way. But most people don't understand that, like you said, Vicodins and Percocets are, opiates just like a heroin, correct?
That's right. They're opiates, and the thing about those drugs that, well, there are a number of things about those drugs. So on the one hand, we get heroin, and most people get heroin from the streets, particularly in the U.S. and UK and these places. You get you get heroin off of the street, and heroin is often stepped on or adulterated, cut with other things, and so the impurities become more dangerous than the actual drug itself, more dangerous than heroin. And so you do need to worry about those impurities. But when you think about the pill cabinet, going to get your mom Percocet or Vicodin, you at least know that there are no impurities besides acetaminophen. If we're talking about Percocet or Vicodin, it contains acetaminophen, a lot more acetaminophen than opioids, than the opioid. The opioid is only like 5 to 10 milligrams, where acetaminophen could be anywhere from 325 milligrams to 500 milligrams. Acetaminophen, of course, is the #1 reason for liver toxicity in the world. And we don't have that discussion. So when we think about people getting in trouble with the prescription drugs, they're getting in trouble in large part because of acetaminophen. But that discussion is not being had. Why do you have acetaminophen in with the opioid? Well, I think we have it in with the opioid because it's an abuse deterrent, in such that trying to discourage people from taking large amounts of the opioid. Acetaminophen, if you take large amounts of that, you're going to really shoot your liver, do some damage to your liver. It's like, I think, if you want people to drive their cars below 70 miles per hour, right? So if people exceed that, you have their tires blow out. That's kind of how I look at having acetaminophen in the opioid, like Vicodin or Percocet. Doesn't seem very smart to me.
Right. There's a part in your book that, well, it's the very beginning of your book, and it really grabbed me. And I think it was like in the early 90s, possibly, when you were running some clinical trials, I believe down in Florida at the time, or with crack cocaine. Was that somewhere else?
All of them were in New York.
In New York.
Yeah.
And
San Francisco,
in New York, okay.
New Haven and New York. Yeah.
And this guy is taking, a hit of crack from the pipe, and afterwards, I believe part of your trial, you were giving him an option of another hit or $5. And he took the money, and this started making you question your own, baggage or ideas about drugs. And like I said, everyone has these ideas, especially with crack. I don't know if crack was more than anything, because in the 80s, I mean, I knew that time when it was just like, it was terror. It was these psychopathic people. And so, is that when you first started going down this path?
Yeah. Well.
What did you learn on that day too? I'm probably paraphrasing that.
No, Brian. I mean, I think you hit it on the head. You described this experiment where we were giving people alternatives, and alternatives was crack or the $5 as an alternative. And you're right. And so in that study, we showed that they took crack about half of the time and $5 about the other half of the time. That was one of the sort of things that got me to start questioning. But it's not like it was one thing, because my sort of thinking about drugs and drugs like crack cocaine was just like you. I mean, it was so well established and so robust, this thinking that crack was the worst drug of them all. I believe that too.
Yeah.
And
I
so
think of New Jack City, Chris Rock as
New
Pookie,
Jack City, man,
having was it
right
crack
on.
withdrawals?
That's it.
Right. Do those even exist? I don't know.
No, those are great questions, man. I'm glad you asked it, because that's exactly right. We certainly look for that too, crack withdrawal, and we certainly didn't find it. Not like what you saw in New Jack City. Right. And even today, people are saying, that was my neighborhood. It's like, no, it wasn't. That's fiction. And you might have seen poverty and crime, a number of things in your neighborhood, but crack was just one of the things in the mix, and those things was in your neighborhood before crack ever hit. But crack was a convenient sort of scapegoat. But yeah, I didn't see this sort of crack withdrawal that Chris Rock portrayed. I think people got it twisted. It's like, well, it's withdrawal, so it looks like heroin withdrawal, so it doesn't matter. It's a drug. But anyway, so when we think about when I started to question, that was one of the things. But all along my education, I was questioning and trying to see what was consistent, what was inconsistent. So it's a 25-year process, and recall now, I just wrote the book in 2013. I published it. That study was done in '99 or so. And I was questioning then, but it took me a lot more evidence to be so forceful and to be so confident that something's really wrong here, that I can say it publicly, because it's a frightening thing to come out in public and say, hey, you know what? Crack isn't as bad as we thought it was,
I had never heard anyone say that until I heard you on Rogan. But yet, the way you spoke, I was like, I got to listen to this guy. And when you started bringing up this scientific evidence, I'm a technically trained scientist, engineer, like everything started making sense with what you were saying. But in the beginning, it must have been very hard for you to come to the conclusion that I got to go all in on this.
No, it's frightening, and it was difficult, and it still remains difficult, as you know. You're saying something that everybody else's anecdotal experience seems to be inconsistent with. And there are scientists who will disagree with this position. But the thing that I just ask people to think about is this. I have personally, my own studies, given thousands of doses of crack cocaine. now with funds from the U.S. government, from U.S. citizens, taxes that they pay. Do you think that we would be allowed to give thousands of doses of crack cocaine if it was as dangerous as we have made it out to be? Not no, but hell no.
So that's evidence right there.
I didn't even start talking about the papers. I mean, we can get into the scientific papers that we publish. I mean, we published dozens of papers on crack cocaine to show. I mean, of course, we were studying crack cocaine because the original reason is that we wanted to try and develop treatments to help people who were addicted. And along the way in science, you make some discoveries. And one of the discoveries that we made was, oops, we said that this drug was 100 times more dangerous than powder cocaine. Not true. Inconsistent with the scientific evidence. When you compare crack cocaine to powder cocaine, produce identical effects, same effects. Some people say, well, crack cocaine is more intense and the effects are more rapid. And so therefore, that justifies this sort of differential treatment under the law.
And it doesn't in your mind?
Well, I'm going to tell you, because it's certainly, when you compare crack cocaine, smoking crack cocaine to snorting powder cocaine, the effects of crack cocaine are more intense because they hit more quickly. But when you dissolve this powder cocaine in water and inject it intravenously, identical effects as smoking the drug. So what we had was basically a difference of route of administration, not drug. They are the same drug. It would be like somebody telling you that we're going to punish people who smoke marijuana more harshly than those people who eat marijuana in their brownies.
Right.
Doesn't make any sense. They're the same drug. Same is true with crack and powder cocaine.
Right.
But we've learned this through the studies that we do.
And cocaine's been injected for, whatever, a long time, 100
Absolutely.
years. Right. And so then why crack in the 80s? Why does it become, is it simply a scapegoat? Is it simply something that politicians grab onto? Is it all about power at the end of the day?
I think, there were a number of things that are going on here. So when we think about power in general, and we think about tools that we use to marginalize people, further marginalize people, drugs become excellent tools in this regard, because we are ready. Well, let me take a step back. You can't do that with a drug like marijuana any longer. So you can't vilify the marijuana users like we once could in 1935, for example. We could vilify marijuana users. We can say that these people start off with marijuana today, but they're on heroin tomorrow, and they're killing their mom after smoking marijuana. We could say that, and people believe that, because there were so few marijuana smokers at the time, or there were so few people who knew about this drug. Couldn't do it. So you could vilify marijuana. The same is true now for crack cocaine. There are relatively few numbers of people who have smoked crack cocaine compared to something like snorting cocaine. So you can make up these incredible stories about crack cocaine and be believed, because people don't have experience with it. Sure, it's new, I don't know. You see this with all these new drugs, so-called new drugs. They're not really new, they're just some new form of the drug. But whenever they hit the market, you have these incredible stories and you are believed, because most people don't know anything about it. And it seems like it's real, it comes from this official source, so I believe it. Now, when you have that sort of thing, now politicians and other people, parents, a number of people, they don't even have to educate about that drug. All they have to do now, politicians, pass a law. Right. Give one group some money, law enforcement, or another group some money, treatment providers, give them money, everybody's happy. Right. Except the people who are getting caught up with possessing that drug. But we don't really care about them anyway, because they really haven't had a voice in the society anyway. And so it functions, this sort of vilification functions to serve people, numbers of powerful people in our society, or people who are plugged in. You don't even have to be powerful. You just have to be a participant in the society.
Right. And so the parents are almost being a bit lazy about parenting. They grab on to the just say no to drugs, don't do this, just blanket qualification.
Yeah, parents are overwhelmed, as you know.
Yeah.
Parents are overwhelmed, and so as a result, it's like, that's one less thing I have to think about. I heard it, this bad, you don't do it.
Right.
There's no parenting going on there, but that happens in a lot of domains, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem. And me as an educator, I want people to actually think and have their kids understand and evaluate the evidence and the information. Because if they're forced to evaluate the information in this domain, it increases the likelihood that they will do a similar sort of thing in another domain. And we as a society benefits when they get practice at evaluating information and making decisions based on the evidence. But I think that might be a bit too idealistic. I think just in general, but I love being idealistic. I mean, when I stop being idealistic, well, fuck, I don't want to be here anymore if I'm not idealistic.
Right. What was the name of your TED Med talk? You said, let's quit abusing drug users.
Yeah.
And in that you mentioned 3 former presidents, that had openly, admitted to doing drugs. And it's funny because you dropped that in your TED talk and then you said, those are our last 3 presidents, and everyone laughed. And it's just fascinating that, like, on one side we can vilify the drug user, and yet when we all look around it and we look in the mirror, it's us, it's all of us. And I always joke, I live here now, I don't live in America anymore, and I always joke that they sent all the Puritans to America, okay? Because over here, we're next to the continent and next to France, and I know you spent time over here in the Air Force, and so you kind of feel like the continental approach is a little bit more like, okay, we're humans, and yeah, we're a little messed up, and sometimes we do some bad stuff, and brothels are legal in Germany, but in America, it's almost like, no, we are Puritan and this is bad and we are good and, the religious right, and I'm giving you all sorts of ammo here. And so why, well, I guess 2 questions. Why do we do that as a society where, we're looking at ourselves so many times and yet we try to put ourselves in a place that we don't do that stuff, or, great people don't do that. It's more than just a drug issue, isn't it?
It's just, you're making me laugh, man, because, you're talking about this place as if it's kind of enlightened. I mean, when it comes to drugs, this is one of the most backwards places you want to be. The UK.
Yeah. And I heard you say that in your speech in Liverpool and a few other times, and that surprises me, actually.
My God, no. Even sex. I mean, you're talking about the brothels in Germany.
Yeah.
Last night, I was watching a documentary on Channel 4 on this legalized prostitution in Germany. It was some of the most moralistic and judgmental thing that you would ever want to see, but they presented it as if it was objective, and they were, okay, these are some judgmental folks. I mean, they're here.
Right. More so than the U.S.
I don't know. Yeah. All right. Let's put it this way. The Prime Minister, Cameron, right? That's his name.
Yeah.
Everybody knows he smoked marijuana. It's in the book, and what he said that he won't deny it. What? I mean, this is amazing to me. 2015, you can't just admit that you smoked marijuana when you have U.S. presidents who have admitted. I mean, Barack Obama not only has admitted smoking marijuana, but also using cocaine. Yeah. And he's probably the smartest president that we've had in decades. I mean, that's not to say that, I support his drug policies or anything like. All I'm saying is that the fact that he used marijuana or used cocaine says nothing about his intellect and his ability to govern. And so they can't even admit that here. I mean, at the Prime Minister level, I think that says something.
Yeah. Maybe it's that everyone thinks that they are more enlightened than everyone else on a personal level and a country level.
And I am not arguing that we are enlightened in the United States, because that's not what I mean. But what I am arguing is that I would rather have drug conversations in the U.S. than in the UK. I think that they are more rigid in terms of their views on drugs. They think they're enlightened.
See, I always am in this impression, and maybe it's because of the guests we've had on here. We've had, Professor David Nutt, and who does a lot of the psilocybin research and things like that. And I always think that, we're near Portugal, and marijuana doesn't seem to be as criminalized over here. Here again, I'm qualifying my government, but I always feel like we're a little more open-minded over here, and we don't have a lot of the baggage that the U.S. does when it comes to hemp and marijuana and all those kind of things. But I guess I'm wrong.
Yeah, I am. I'm reluctant to even say that like I would rather deal with U.S. officials on drugs than the U.K. Because it's almost like a compliment to U.S. officials, and I don't want to do that. And so I don't want to give them a compliment because I am not happy about how we deal with drugs in the U.S. But I certainly am more happy than I am with how they're doing it here.
I watched a video where you were at Liverpool giving a speech, I believe, and you played an old video of Ronald and Nancy Reagan from, I believe, '86, maybe?
Yeah.
And I remember that campaign. I remember the Say No to Drugs. I remember there was, I watched the video, and, Ronald Reagan's talking about this new form of cocaine and, this thing, and it's all going to be an epidemic and all that stuff. And, that was back when there weren't a lot of other sources of media. We forget how powerful television used to be. Right. And so you didn't have any counter argument anywhere. And it was a goddamn president of the United States and his wife. So, how much are we still living in that message that was sent, 30 years ago now?
Unfortunately, I think many of us, but you and I were just joking about New Jack City, because you still have, like you said, we have all these other medias, but places like VH1, New Jack City has apparently found a home there every other weekend. It's on. And so it's also educating a new generation of the effects of crack cocaine. So those things are still out there. We're still in the 1980s when it comes to drugs like crack cocaine, but fortunately, we have some scientists, some people who are speaking out. Like you mentioned, David Nutt. Big fan I am of David Nutt's work. There are other people who have been speaking out. Scientists, guy in Vancouver, Canada, Bruce Alexander, a number of people who have done a lot of scientific work and who are calling into question what we are teaching and saying about drugs. Whereas in the 80s, there were fewer people because we simply didn't know. But now, the evidence is overwhelming.
What I like about you is that you don't point the finger at the government or the prison union or this and that. You say Public Enemy and the producers of New Jack City and even scientific community, everyone is responsible, and parents in their own way of perpetuating an untruth because of lack of education.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because like law enforcement, that's an easy sort of target, and the government is an easy target. The government will do precisely what the voters want them to do. That's a fact. Because they worry about, that's why I don't really talk to government officials. They are a waste of time for me. But I talk to voters. I'd rather talk to the population because they're the ones that really are in control of this. If the voters didn't want these laws to be the way they are, they wouldn't be that way. It's the voters, and so that's who we have to educate, not the political officials. So I don't blame them. I don't blame them entirely. I just don't think they're not leaders, and that's unfortunate.
And what about law enforcement or prison unions or, there's a whole prison industrial complex as well. What is your read on that?
A number of people have spoken on this. Michelle Alexander, I think her book is the best known, The New Jim Crow, and she kind of points out how law enforcement has benefited from these sort of drug laws. Other people have talked about how in the United States, you might know we got 2.3 million people in jail or so, more than any other country that ever has inhabited Earth.
You said 5% of the population in America, 25% of the prison population.
Absolutely. So we have all of these people in prison, and now we have the private prison industry, and their commodity that they deal in are prisoners, and so they are in support of these tough laws. In that way, their pockets get fat. It's kind of simple. We know that happens, and I don't know what more can we say about it. It's clear, we know it's happening, The incentives are in place for it to happen. We need to change the incentives. It's kind of simple. If we change the incentives, this won't happen. But we as a people, our general population seems to be okay with it. That's why it happens. It's not that these people are just simply evil. I mean, they're just doing what the people want them to do.
And so you think the real message has to go to those people. You know, a lot of people throw their hands up and they're like, oh, we're not in control of the government. But yeah, you don't buy into that. Everyone can vote their way.
No, I think people are apathetic because it doesn't impact them. You know, and they have to be shamed. I think it's part of our responsibility too to shame those people and say, this is a human rights violation. You know, these are the same people who may say that, hey, I protested against apartheid, or I marched with Martin Luther King. You know, they say all of this sort of historical thing. Well, you have those things happening right now. Where are you? And so it's our responsibility to say, call them out. If we don't call them out, shame on us.
Talk to me about your background, because your book is so good because you weave in your personal story. Although I think you don't like talking too much about your personal story, and I'm not going to get into too many details. But, you know, you grew up as a young black man in the South. We were talking about Miami. Miami is not South Beach, as we were saying earlier. It's a small sliver. You know, the rest of Miami, you know, you might as well be in Mississippi, as far as I guess I understand.
That's exactly right.
You know, what was your life like growing up, and has that been an asset to you now in what you do?
Yeah, I think so, man. I think that's a good way to put it. I think it certainly has been an asset, right? I mean, obviously, when I think about many of my friends, you put it, I grew up in the hood, and I grew up in sort of rough circumstances, engaged in petty crimes, did all those sorts of things, participated in the underground economy, did all of this sort of thing. And my friends did, and many of them didn't manage to survive, as one might predict. Just because of circumstances. But growing up as an outsider in the country helped me to really watch and learn and shut my mouth. And that has helped me in science. That's what science is really all about. You watch, carefully observe, and you go where the evidence tells you to go. And so I think that's really helped me. And it also has helped me. Being an outsider has helped me to sympathize with those people who are less fortunate, or those people who don't have a voice or don't have the power. I mean, now in my life, I'm doing okay. I'm all right. I am a part of the power structure. I can be a part of that. But my background has helped me to understand the needs and the concerns of people who are not. And so I have to look in the mirror every day, and I have to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to promote these ideals of sort of freedom, human rights, justice, equality, all of these kinds of things that I was taught as a kid, and I didn't see as a kid. And so I want to make sure I do my part. I mean, because those ideals, man, they're great. I mean, they're outstanding. You can't beat them. And I think I'm in a position to help to make sure that we bring those ideals to as many people as possible, and to call out people who are in positions and not doing this.
You said one time that, you know, it's not the drugs themselves that are the problem. The problems are, you know, poverty, unemployment, selective enforcement, ignorance. Is it really not the drugs anymore? Again, I asked earlier, is it about power? Or is that just a simplistic way of the way I'm looking at it?
So it all depends how we define the problem. So okay. If we're talking about the problem of drug addiction, and that's kind of what I was talking about in that regard, or if we're talking about the problem of drugs in terms of trafficking, if we're talking about the problems of drugs, there can be a number of things. So if we're talking about addiction, yeah, we can say the problem is not drugs. I mean, the simple evidence there is that the vast majority of people who use the substance don't have a problem. So how can you say it's the substance? So maybe we should start looking at the environment, the individual, all of these things, but we can't say it's the drug. That would be naive and not careful. That would just, that wouldn't be very smart. Now, if we think about like drug trafficking and we start thinking about what is the problem. I mean, we think about drug trafficking, no matter what, in any human society, you're going to have people who engage in deviant behavior. That is, behaviors that's not condoned by the society, and when that behavior happens, the society takes actions to discourage or stop that behavior. You're going to always have that sort of thing going on as long as you have humans. So when we think about drug trafficking from that perspective, as long as we set the...
To watch the rest of this fascinating interview, click on the link below and go to londonrealacademy.com. There you can sign in with your social media login and watch the rest of the episode for free, along with all of our episodes on London Real, my webinars, and all of our premium content, all located over at londonrealacademy.com. So click on the link below, you'll be directed there, and you can watch the rest of this fascinating interview, and I'll see you there.
They don't want people killed because they want to make their money. And so people get killed because of this, or a variety of reasons, but in part because of this over-policing of that sort of activity. And then it increases the potential profits and activity. So we need to step back and say, all right,